Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and we are specifically going to talk about the true legacy of Gary Gygax, in my humble opinion, which is Unbound Identity and Unbound Immersion, and what Gary Gygax truly was, in my humble opinion. And in another attempt to get the world to see what Gary actually really accomplished, in my humble opinion. All right, here we go. All right, so it's hard. Like, I have some challenges in my life. So, and one of them is this belief I have that I understand what Gary accomplished in a way that no one else does, and I really want to get people to see it. But right now, I'm standing alone. I'm standing alone in a field, crying out a truth that only I believe. Right? And it's hard. It's hard. So, like, one, I want to just thank everybody who is consistent, who consistently continues to watch this channel, because I know what I'm saying here, like, no one in the world is saying this, right? Like, and I think there might be 3 people on the planet who believe what I believe at this point. And I do think I have 1 or 2 crossovers already, right? But it's tentative and it's at the beginning stages, and I don't want to like call them out, right? Because it's hard standing alone in a field, and it probably isn't that much easier when there's 3 people in the field. It'd probably be easier, but not much, right? So it's difficult, right? So here's the thing: who was Gary Gygax? And I want to show you who Gary Gygax was, because at this point, I started playing when I was in 1982. And so, I'm coming up on a solid 39 years of playing Dungeons & Dragons, and studying Gary Gygax in depth. And I think I'm at a vantage where I see this unique thing, right? And I think here's a good way, and I want to give the world a way to understand this, right? Because I know this is incredibly nuanced and complicated, right? So here we go. I think the best way to look at Gary Gygax and understand him is to understand that he was a magician, right? Now, why do I use that term, magician? Well, it's exactly everything that Gary was, and it also determined what he wasn't. So one of the things is, and the internet absolutely detests nuance, and so people will come into my comments and they'll go, "You worship Gary Gygax." That's fundamentally wrong. Gary Gygax was nothing but a human being. He had no supernatural powers, and no one should worship him, right? People should revere him. There's a difference between reverence and worship. Oh, and I know, oh, but Scott, they're so close, and I'm on the internet, and I want to just jam your word reverence into the word worship, and let's pretend that it's worship, right? It's not. It's reverence. There's a difference, right? And so, I do revere him, and what he did was so profoundly huge, right? So basically, the reason that he is a magician is he is not a wizard. What he did was not magic, right? But I will tell you this right now: he is working right now. He's dead, right? But his real work is happening now, right? Now, how on earth does a dead person work, right? Well, George Washington, right? Like, you're living in George Washington's work right now, right? Like, you are living in his legacy, right? You are living in the legacy of Harriet Tubman right now. She is working. Her legacy is doing work and accomplishing tasks, right? And Gary Gygax is exactly the same. What he set into motion and the exact choices he made it so that what we have right now, he is doing new additional work, right? And so I think the best way to see Gary Gygax is to understand him as a magician, right? Now, why do we need to understand him as a magician? Because the reality is, I think he tricked people. I think so Gary Gygax was born in 1938, okay? By the time he was 10 years old, he had witnessed 2 nuclear blasts on the planet Earth, right? He had seen the darkest, he had lived through, in my opinion, inarguably, the darkest moment in human history since 0 AD, or actually 33 AD, okay? Right? So he had seen the end of a world war. He had seen what choice Germany had made, like 6 million choices. He had seen 2 nuclear blasts across on the other side of the world in a place that he would grow to revere and love in his lifetime, right? Just horrible, horrible things, right? He lived through the Korean War, and this is all before he sets Dungeons and Dragons into place. He lived through the Korean War, and he lived through the assassination of a U.S. president, John F. Kennedy, okay? So he is seeing, he starts his life witnessing the end of the greatest conflict that humankind has ever known, right? Then we move on to the Korean War, which he sees, he witnesses, sees occurring in his world, right? Sees humanity just tearing at each other constantly, right? Sees someone execute the U.S. president. This is all before he releases Dungeons & Dragons in 1974, right? And then he sees tens of thousands of American soldiers, carted over to Vietnam, and 50,000 of them come back in pine boxes. That's where Gary was, right? So he's seeing this. He's seeing humanity is shredding each other tooth and claw, right? And I think what he was saying to himself is, I got to fix this, right? And he looked at the politicians of the world, and he looked at the institutions of the world, and he looked at all these different organizations and institutions, and they were just failing and failing and failing. And guess what? They're still failing now. We have one of the most terrible debacles started in March 2020, and we're looking to our leaders to fix it, and it just gets worse. They cannot aid us, right? It's just horrendous, and everything keeps coming back adapted and stronger, right? And we're like, oh my gosh, can the governments help us? Can the scientists help us? Can anybody help us, right? And increasingly the answer is no, right? And so I think that Gary looked at all this and he's like, the politics aren't helping. The scientists are building things that we're using to destroy each other. How can I make a lasting difference? How can I make people's lives better during the years I'm here on this planet and far beyond the years I'm on this planet? And you know what he did? He made it in 1974. He said, I'm going to give humanity more life, more lives. Something that approaches a new type of immortality, unbound identity. And he said, and in order to get there, I'm going to make every narrative engine ever devised by humanity shamanic tales, books, movies, television, video games. I'm going to antiquate them. I'm going to make them so that the stories they tell are sad and shriveled and small because they're made for the masses. They're not tailor-made in the moment, crafted to the people they're being told for, right? And also, through polyhedral dice, I'm going to remind humans that they are not God and that randomness should be in every story. And what he did was he tricked people. He tricked, in my humble opinion, Gary Gygax tricked people into thinking he had made a game, when in reality, what he had actually done was established in 1776. George Washington threw down the gauntlet and established freedom for Americans, right? And broke us off from the monarchy where we're crushed under, right? And Harriet Tubman, she risked life and limb to show the world that courage will give you freedom when you have been denied it. In 1974, Gary Gygax said, you are free from budgets. You are free from living in one life. You can live 1,000 lives. You can live 100 lives. You are not bound by this reality. I give you this new thing that approaches a new type of immortality, right? And it's astounding. It's truly, truly astounding. The best way, in my opinion, to understand who Gary Gygax was what he accomplished is to understand him as a magician. And just like magicians, he did a trick which, when it is fully finished, will end in the delight of the world. When everyone sees what I see and sees who Gary truly was, what he actually accomplished, not the mere shadow of it, right? Gary Gygax's legacy is not a better war game. Gary Gygax's legacy is a freedom that surpassed what George Washington accomplished, and, clearly, in my opinion. All that's my opinion. I'm willing to hear you. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.